It's pretty clear we're social creatures, right? We're just built for connection, for community. But what happens when all of that gets taken away? What does being isolated for a long time actually do to our minds and our bodies? Well, we're going to get into it.
Okay, so we've all been there. After a super long week, sometimes all you want is just a quiet evening to yourself, and man, it can be a total blessing. That kind of peaceful alone time, it has real stress-relieving benefits. It's our chance to reflect, recharge, and just breathe.
But that whole experience just flips on its head when being alone isn't your choice. What happens when it's forced on you? For days, or weeks, or even years? Yeah, that's when things get really, really damaging. And this brings us to a really critical point, one that's kind of the foundation for this whole conversation, the difference between being alone and being isolated. They sound similar, but they are not the same thing at all. And the impact they have on us, it couldn't be more different.
So look at it this way. On one side, you've got solitude that you choose. That's where you find peace, reflection. But on the other side, you have forced isolation. And that triggers chronic stress, it threatens our very idea of who we are, and it leads to some serious emotional instability.
So what's actually going on inside our heads when this is happening? Let's dive into the hard science, because prolonged isolation literally rewires our brain.
Okay, so a huge reason for this is something researchers call social reality testing. The easiest way to think about it is like a sounding board, right? We talk to other people to check if our perceptions are rational. Like, if you're worried you totally overreacted to something, you might just ask a friend, hey, was I being crazy? Without that feedback loop, well, our sense of who we are and even reality itself just starts to crumble.
And when that sense of self starts to crumble, the psychological fallout it's severe. We are talking about a whole cascade of symptoms here: deep depression, obsessions that just spiral, suicidal thoughts, and in some cases, even delusions and hallucinations. Not to mention intense anxiety and just uncontrollable rage. Now, these psychological symptoms, they're actually rooted in some pretty startling physical changes in the brain. Your prefrontal cortex, that's the part for complex thought, planning, impulse control, it can actually shrink from lack of use. Seriously, think of it like a muscle that's wasting away. At the exact same time, the limbic system, that's our primal center for fear and emotion, it goes into total overdrive. What you get is this neurological seesaw, right? It tips away from rational thought and just plunges you toward raw, unchecked emotion. And all this profound stress on the brain, it doesn't just stay there. Nope. It creates a domino effect, and that leads to a breakdown in the rest of the body.
The physical toll is it's extensive. People can completely lose their sense of time, they struggle with sleep, they experience heart palpitations, and then there are the headaches, the dizziness, and this painful hypersensitivity to sounds and light becomes really common. Stress can even mess with your digestive system so badly that it leads to major weight loss.
So when you step back and look at this whole spectrum of damage, both psychological and physical, it's really no surprise that the consensus is crystal clear. The United Nations, along with tons of human rights experts, they classify this kind of forced long-term isolation not as punishment, but as a form of torture. Period.
And yet, despite being classified as torture, it's a practice that's systematically used in prisons all over the world. You know it as solitary confinement.
The scale of this is it's staggering. In the United States alone, as of 2019, we're talking about over 120,000 people living in solitary confinement. Just let that number sink in for a second.
So what does that actually look like? What does it mean? Well, it means spending almost every single hour of every single day. We're talking 22 to 24 hours alone, in a cell that's usually windowless and about the size of a parking spot.
This whole practice has a really strange history. It was actually introduced back in the late 1700s by Quakers. They thought it would lead to quiet reflection, penitence, but it was criticized almost right away. Its use kind of faded out, only to come roaring back in the 1980s with the rise of tough-on-crime policies and prison populations that were just exploding.
And that early criticism, it was harsh. I mean, the author Charles Dickens, after seeing it for himself, condemned it in no uncertain terms. He called it worse than any torture of the body. So yeah, this is not a new debate by any stretch of the imagination.
So what happens after someone finally gets out of solitary? The damage doesn't just stop when the cell door opens. The scars are long-lasting. And that raises some really urgent questions about whether there are better ways to do things. Get this. People who have gone through solitary confinement are 3 times more likely to show signs of PTSD. They talk about lasting changes to their personality, this heightened anxiety and paranoia in just everyday situations, and a really profound difficulty concentrating and, maybe saddest of all, connecting with other people.
All of this leads to a pretty stark conclusion. Not only does this practice cause immense damage, which is the complete opposite of rehabilitation, but studies also show it flat out fails at its stated goal of reducing prison violence. So it's both harmful and ineffective.
So, are there better ways? Absolutely. Just take a look at Norway. Their whole system is fundamentally different. It's built on a principle they call restorative justice. So instead of just pure punishment, the focus is on rehabilitation, on education, on giving people skills so they can actually re-enter society. And the data? It's undeniable. Norway has one of the lowest rates of recidivism, that's reoffending, in the entire world. It really suggests that a more humane, community-focused approach isn't just nicer, it's actually more effective.
When you boil it all down, the evidence seems to point to a pretty simple, powerful truth. Our brains, our bodies, they're just wired for connection. And when things get broken, it seems we heal better together. So what do you think? Maybe it's time we rethink our whole approach to punishment and rehabilitation.